Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the second video in our series, What is Torg? A Torg, specifically, is a god, not a pleasant or nice one, not a fun or benevolent one, a violent, evil, vicious thing seeking to drain the energy out of the universe. Why would this thing exist? Why would this particular role-playing game be named after a creature which does not, at the time it's taking place, exist in the universe? There is, in Torg, no Torg. The entire point of the game is to prevent the existence of the Torg. And for this, we need to go to the very dawn of creation in the Torg universe to explain what possibility energy is. At the start of all things, there was a void. There was nothing. And into this nothing sprung a being, or an energy. The being came later. This energy was eternity energy, and it sought to create something within the nothing. The nothing did not want something, so it resisted, and this resulted in a maelstrom, a cacophony, a violent conflict within the space between something and nothing. In time, these two forces coalesced into two beings, Apirios and the Nameless One, who I will refer to as Num1 for the sake of brevity. Apirios created a multitude of worlds within the nothing, and Num1 destroyed them as fast as he made them. So, Apirios created a multitude of universes with worlds in them, and once again, Num1 destroyed them. This went on for quite a bit of time. Eventually, Apirios realized that he could not create faster than Num1 could destroy. So instead of creating a universe or multiple universes, he created an energy, possibility energy, and a system for this energy to create infinite universes. Some of you will be familiar with multiverse theory, of course, the idea that every decision we make, every action we take, creates two parallel universes, one where we took the action or succeeded at the action, and one where we failed spectacularly or did not take the action at all. In the game Torg, this was Apirios' plan. One universe became two, 2 became 4, 4 became 8, 8 became 16, and by the time Num1 realized what was going on, billions upon billions upon billions of universes of an ever-accelerating multitude had come into existence. Faster and faster and faster they multiplied, dividing and dividing endlessly, infinitely, beyond any ability to destroy them. In response, Num1 realized that he had to consume this energy that allowed them to multiply, this possibility energy. And so he created a legion of devices to aid him in draining, drinking, destroying that energy. These were the darkness devices. But they could not function alone. They needed operators, beings within the universes to wield them and devour the energy. And so Num1 promised to those operators that if they should consume all of the energy within the universe in which they existed, they would become a being called Torg, wielding absolute control over that universe. The best example of a Torg in modern cinematography would be Thanatos in Avengers Endgame, a being capable of wiping out life on a cosmic level by the use of a device powered with pieces of eternity. But 5 meager gems will not make a Torg. 4 or 5 eternity shards will not power the change to a universe-shattering god. 1,000 shards, 1,000,000 shards will not come close to the scope and scale of possibility energy required to power a Torg. Billions, trillions, quadrillions of units of possibility energy are necessary. And so the madmen calling themselves High Lord have drained dozens and dozens and dozens of worlds of any semblance of choice before arriving at Earth. That is what possibility energy creates, by the way, choice. The Abrahamic religions say that God gave unto man free will, the ability to change the world in which he lives. It is this thing the High Lords drain. A region supplanted by them finds itself incapable of making decisions, of affecting the world around them, of affecting their own lives, or anything at all. When they leave, the world is a dead husk, incapable even of supporting life. Again, I tell you, dozens of worlds were shattered by each of the 6 High Lords who arrived upon Earth before ever they came here. And the reason they chose to split this particular world between them was because the possibility energy here was richer than any they had ever seen. So, we have our enemy. We have our conflict. But we need a brief explanation over what precisely a cosm is. Before we can proceed into that, I need to cover a few very baseline things. The Everlaws. The Everlaw of One states that of the multitude of possible things that could happen, only one is permitted to happen in one place at one time. If there is the possibility of you being both alive and dead, you must either be alive or dead. You cannot be both. This has 2 critical effects. The first and most obvious is to correct contradictions out of existence. If there is, for instance, a cyborg wandering around an area where cyborgs should not exist, the cyborg stops functioning until it is moved to an area where cyborgs ought to exist. The second, and perhaps more important, is to ensure each timeline is fully autonomous. You cannot exist in a timeline where you did not drink coffee this morning if you drank coffee this morning, because only the non-drinking you timeline is acceptable. This directly precludes all time travel and dimension hopping. You may go to another reality within your dimension, but you may not go to an alternate timeline because the things you did in this timeline were or were not done in that timeline, and therefore that would be a contradiction which the Everlaw of One would preclude. The Everlaw of Two states that the living and unliving forces of the reality are linked by possibility energy. That is, that the energy circulates from the living to the unliving and back to the living in a cycle that allows for the living to alter and change the objects around them within their reality. They may move a chair, they may move a desk, they may drink coffee. All of this is made possible by the possibility energy cycling between the living and the unliving. It is by manipulating the Everlaw of Two that the possibility raiders, aka High Lords, are able to siphon off the possibilities of a realm. By imposing a barrier between the realm and the living people in it, that is, between the unliving and the living will attempt to influence the unliving to move a chair, desk, whatever, and the energy will not return to them, instead being drained away to the High Lord's darkness device when it tries to pass back from the unliving to the living. The ever law of 3 states that possibility energy may come to rest in objects of critical importance, around which the events of the world will revolve because of the energy stored within them. Objects in core Earth history, such as the Holy Grail or Excalibur, around which historical events of staggering importance occurred, are clear examples of eternity shards. As the possibility raiders, i.e. High Lords, began to drain the possibilities from the world, the people resisting them took up these items, found them in caves, in caverns, wherever, in order to resist the High Lords and defend the world's possibilities from draining away. The ever law of 4 states that possibility energy may come to rest in individuals. These individuals absorb excess possibilities that otherwise would flow back into the land in order to defend the land from the raiders of possibilities, i.e. the High Lords. These individuals with these excess possibilities are called Storm Knights and are, on a very functional level, the player characters and whatever other associates you decide to add to the game. Dozens, hundreds, thousands of Storm Knights have come forward during the course of the Possibility Wars, desperate to destroy the High Lords and drive them from our world. It is this 4th ever law, allowing individuals to amass possibilities by their actions, that allows the resistance of humanity against the invaders. We now get into one of the most difficult parts of Torg to understand, the axioms. The axioms are roughly understood as the level of a sophistication a given reality will tolerate. In almost defiance of all common sense, if you bring a modern computer from Core Earth, Tech 23, into a Rorsch, Tech 19, it will simply stop working, because the tech axiom is not high enough to support a computer. Conversely, if an Eilish mage at Magic 18 attempts to cast a spell in Core Earth at Magic 7, it will again completely fail to work because the Core Earth magic axiom is not high enough to support a spell of Axiom 18. This is a very interesting mechanic, and one I happen to like a very great deal, because it is in the end the balancing mechanism that allows the lizard people of the Living Lands to battle tanks of Core Earth and actually win. So let us go through each of these axioms. The magic axiom is just that, the ease and ability to use magic in a given realm. The magic level of Core Earth is roughly tantamount to cavemen with sticks and rocks, which is what the tech axiom of the Living Lands is. It's nearly impossible to do anything useful, insanely difficult, and nothing complicated or intricate can possibly be achieved. Conversely, the magic axiom of Isle at 18 would be roughly the equivalent of the 1940s for a tech axiom. Very intricate and complicated spells may be cast. They can be extremely powerful to the point where they can destroy entire city blocks quite easily. In between, you have a Rorsch, New Nile, and eventually, though not currently, Tharcold, all of which have reasonable access to magic, though not anything too excessively destructive. The social axiom is the level of organization, civic virtue, public good. It is generally understood as the level of governance and the social cohesion of the area in question. Core Earth is 21. Isle, Aurora, New Nile are all slightly lower, so not quite as much social cohesion. Living Lands is very, very low, 7. And what this functionally means is Barak Khan does not, in point of fact, have an army. He doesn't have officers because the concept doesn't exist. He doesn't have ranks because the concept of rank doesn't exist. There are no real orders because the concept of following orders doesn't exist in the Living Lands. The best he can manage is to gather a reasonably large number of tribes, say the enemies of Lanella are that way, and cross his fingers that Lanella keeps most of them alive. Again, this created massive problems when the US Army tried to invade the Living Lands. We'll get to that in a little bit, in a future video actually. When the US Army tried to invade the Living Lands, the entire structure of the army completely broke down. Because again, the concept of rank, officer, order, unit cohesion ceased to exist the instant the soldiers of the US Army entered the Living Lands. So while the concept of a social axiom might be somewhat difficult, there are guidelines in the book how these things work, straight down to what happens at what level. But again, generally speaking, if you're playing in the Living Lands, complex social interactions aren't going to be something you see happening. The spirit axiom is the ability to manifest the will of your preferred divine being into the world. It is the ability to ask a god, gods, goddesses, whatever, to please do something nice for you with the reasonable expectation that they're going to follow through on that. Now, there is a critical benchmark at Spirit 2021. At Spirit 2021, so this is the Living Lands, the ability of people to manifest miracles becomes vastly simpler. Prior to Spirit 20, you need trained professionals to do this. After Spirit 20, anyone or any group is able to manifest miracles regardless of whether they've received training or not. Usually, how I will adjudicate this is any axiom over 20 grants 1 point of automatic focus skill for every axiom level over 20. So, Spirit 24, every single person has 4 automatic adds in focus skill. That's not literally what the rules say. What the rules say is the difficulty for the skills, the miracles, is lowered by 1 point, but that doesn't work with other things the rules say about how miracles work. So I'm going to do a video, again, this will probably be 2 videos in the future, on how miracles and magic in Torg function, and I'll go over the details there. But for now, generally speaking, what I personally do is every single person from a Spirit 20 plus axiom gets 1 add in focus for every point of spirit axiom over 20. So everyone in the Living Lands automatically has 4 adds in focus. That said, we are now going to do a very quick rant on the cyber papacy. The cyber papacy was intended as the cyberpunk realm for Torg. Its execution was terrible. I will go into why this is when I do a specific video on the cyber papacy. But for right now, significant reworks of its axiom are absolutely necessary within the understood rules of Torg. Simple example. In order to have demons and devils running around, you must have a magical rating of 15. They won't show up if you do not have magic axiom 15. Cyber papacy has a magic axiom of 10 and is absolutely covered in demons and devils running around in broad daylight, terrorizing random villagers. So that usually gets raised. One of the first things I do is raise the magic axiom of cyber papacy to 15. Second of all, Aurora has little to no meaningful religion. There are religions, they're not a huge part of day-to-day life. New Nile, religion is something the government does, but isn't really that important to the overwhelming majority of people running around in day-to-day life. Same is true of Isle. Isle has religion, has priests, has really nice spells, but the overwhelming majority of people rely on magic because it's available to nearly everyone. You will note that all of the areas I just mentioned have a spirit axiom significantly higher than Cyber France. In Cyber France, it is illegal not to attend church. You will be accused of heresy, called a witch, and have to go through dunking and other trials of ordeal if you do not show up to church regularly. The entire population of France has to show up to church once or twice a day, period, full stop. And for some reason, it is a spirit axiom of 14. Conversely, the entire concept of law enforcement and guilty until proven innocent has fallen by the wayside in Cyber France. Again, if you are accused of witchcraft, you are put through a series of trials you would have expected to see in Salem in the 1600s. They burn people in Cyber France for being witches. They dunk them in rivers and see if they float. Add on to this, the majority of law enforcement is done by vigilante ultranationalist biker gangs. So a social axiom of 18 makes absolutely zero sense. Isle has a social axiom of 18, and it actually has functional courts. How I will usually deal with the cyber papacy is, as I've already said, increase the magical axiom to 15, and then swap the social and spiritual axioms. So the social axiom is 14, reflecting the breakdown of law and order. The spiritual axiom is 18, reflecting the requirement that everyone believe in God and you don't get a choice in this. And the tech axiom is 26, but that's entirely inconsistent for reasons we'll go into when I deal with a video on Cyber France. That said, tech axiom. The tech axiom is the easiest to understand, other than the minor detail that tech stops working if it's in the wrong axiom. If you attempt to bring a laser gun to core Earth, it stops working. If you attempt to bring a cyborg into Aurora, it stops working. If you attempt to bring a flintlock rifle into the Living Lands, it stops working. This has caused huge problems for modern militaries because the instant they drive their equipment into a lower tech axiom, the equipment stops working. New Nile has actually taken extreme advantage of this by creating reality bombs, which drop Nile reality briefly into an area of core Earth, thus causing all of the tanks and planes and guns to stop functioning while the Nile army advances. Conversely, the cyber papacy has been massively held back because it cannot send its laser cannon hover tanks anywhere without them immediately ceasing to function. So, tech axiom, generally speaking, core Earth is 23. Higher than that, you're looking at slight advances with Nippon Tech / Pan Pacifica. Cyber papacy, we're talking Star Wars level technology here. Not exactly, but pretty darn close. Conversely, Living Lands is at the level of pointy sticks. Like literally the primary weapon of the Living Lands army is called a blossom spear, which is a blade of grass that they prayed really hard, and it turned into a spear. So before we go into where each of these realms is, we need to cover something called Stella. In order to disrupt the flow of possibility energy from Earth to its inhabitants, the High Lords need to create a boundary, and that boundary is within a zone. Now, you will note this map has lovely triangles on it. These triangles are the zones within which the flow of possibility energy is disrupted. And the points of the triangles are what are called stella. Stella is simply an anchor for the reality of the High Lords and can be absolutely anything. The Living Lands uses corpses wrapped in leaves. The New Nile Empire uses statues of Horus, and Pan Pacifica / Nippon Tech uses ATM machines. Obviously, pulling these out would be extremely convenient. The problem is, once an individual is drained of possibilities, if they are forced to axiom shift to a different reality, they're killed. They have no ability to change, so if the world around them changes, they simply die. Thus, once stella are laid down and the possibilities of the individual in the area are changed, ripping them up is, on a very functional level, mass murder. We will, in a future video, go into how you retroact this, but for now, tearing stella out of the ground is a really bad idea. We are going to go through each of the realms, very brief overview, where they are, what things are like. The Living Lands put 3 or 4 maelstrom bridges down, trying to claim the entirety of North America in one fell swoop. They massively overreached. Barak Kun is extremely overextended. This becomes an incredible problem. Later, he is forced to pull entirely out of northern Canada. And we're not going to make a big surprise, but the area between New York and Chicago is not going to be his. So in the Living Lands, we are talking caveman reality, very low tech, extremely high levels of spiritual belief to the point where nearly everything you could want will be handled by prayer. There are dinosaurs running around all over the place. There are all kinds of weird alien beings, giant bugs. It is generally Land of the Lost on steroids, and it's pretty easy if you're trying to do a tabletop war game to make an army out of the Living Lands. Isle is the high fantasy realm. It is the Dungeons and Dragons, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, medieval warfare with huge levels of magic. Magic in Isle is as common for them as automobiles and cell phones are for us today. It is used for absolutely everything. There are spells for catching fish. There are spells for shearing sheep. There are spells for getting birds to land on your plate. There are spells for starting fires and cooking food. There are spells for everything in Isle, and very nearly everyone is able to use them. One of the rules when making an Eilish character is that you have to roll on a table to determine your birth magic, which is a school and specialty you're simply innately born with. If you start an Eilish character, you start with, I think it's 2 adds in magical abilities simply because you are from Isle. Again, it is extremely easy to make a tabletop wargame army from Isle. There is an entire creature book to make an army out of. There are huge numbers of factions ranging from houses. I think there's 6 houses in the human part of Isle, on top of which there are elves, there are dwarves, there are fairies, giants, trolls, all kinds of things. And then an entire creature compendium after that for even more stuff you can make an army out of. Cyber France is, for all practical purposes, a 15th century witch trial with Star Trek era technology. It is going to be very, very, very difficult to build an army with the core source books because there are only 6 or 8 pages of creatures between all of the books added together. There are creatures that only exist on the net in a second book, but those only exist in the Godnet. They don't come out. You might be able to adlib something where a priest is able to summon them out of the Godnet. That's something you might want to do. But generally speaking, what you're going to have to do to make a tabletop wargame army for Cyber France is take your standard human soldiers and start adding cyberware to them. I mean, there's 2 or 3 tanks, there's a couple of APCs you can use, but generally speaking, you're going to have to create rules for how much cyberware adds how many points to unit cost, and then literally just build armies of Cybermen for you to have combat troops on a tabletop game. Dr. Mobius did not waste time when he invaded Core Earth. He picked a region that was very sparsely populated, had very little military, extremely poor command and control, and attacked with overwhelming force. The result of this is that he has seized an incredibly large territory in just a couple of months, driving back nearly all opposition until he ran into the combined forces of the Arab Peninsula and the Israeli army. The Central African armies have presented very, very little real opposition and are doing their best just to hold their ground with massive outside support from around the world. Israel and the Arabs, once they set down their differences to us, oh, wow, we have a real problem here, we need to deal with this dude, have actually formed a consistent resistance against him. The response to this, as I said earlier, was the introduction of reality bombs, where he will literally drop very, very small pockets, half a mile at most, compared to what normally a Stella will do, that's incredibly small. Drop little pockets of reality onto opposing forces, disabling their equipment, allowing him to advance. Even with this, he has consistently been stymied to his northeast, and it is looking like his future expansion will be to the south and west. New Nile for tabletop wargaming has the same problem that Cyber France does. You have a couple of tanks, a couple of personnel carriers, some very, very basic infantry, and that's pretty much it. If anything, it is even smaller creature section in the core book than Cyber France does. The modifications you're going to get to make with New Nile are going to be what's called weird science, which is kind of like Dr. Freeze's ray gun, pretty much. So you're going to have to do a lot of adjudicating with rules how powerful weird science items can be and how frequently they get added to an army. If anything, a New Nile army is going to actually very closely resemble a squadron of space marines, where you have 4 or 5 very, very powerful units, maybe a couple of vehicles, and you're pitting that against a much larger army of much weaker units. From the very outset of the invasion, problems bedeviled the Gaunt Man. Trapped in a maelstrom storm by a group of storm knights, he was unable to act for months and months, leaving nearly the entire operation of his realm to his assistant Tharchan, who is a techno-demon from Tharkudu. The result of this is the near total stagnation of his realm and the inability to expand even a single stella into any core Earth territory. Tharchan's performance has been staggeringly underwhelming, and as a result, the Gaunt Man's realm is, while not as small as, say, Cyber France, significantly smaller than most of the other realms invading core Earth. That said, in a few months' time into the campaign, the Gaunt Man breaks free and begins slowly, if not steadily, expanding his realm into Southeast Asia and Northern Australia. It is insanely easy to make a tabletop wargame army out of Arosh. Zombies, Zavumbis, which are stronger zombies, Ghasts, Gospog, the others, which are giant tentacle monsters, and an entire source book of horrors makes assembling an army unbelievably easy. In addition, there are rules for creating your own horrors, which make it even easier to make a balanced army your opponent will be willing to face, hopefully. So, the Cosmo of Arosh is probably going to be one of the more popular realms to make an army out of, due to the presence of vampires, werewolves, and all manner of nasties with which an army may be created. Pan Pacifica / Nippon Tech is the realm of subterfuge and guile. The High Lord of the region has taken control of Japan, not by force of arms, not by violence, not by monsters, but by simply buying it. Quite literally. The stella of Nippon Tech are ATM machines, and the High Lord has literally purchased huge swathes of property all across Japan and into Southeast Asia, and put the stella up and declared himself the owner. That said, organizing a tabletop army for Pan Pacific and Nippon Tech is impossible because they have no army. There's no tanks, there's no guns, there's no soldiers, there's accountants buying everything they can lay their fingers on and issuing mountains of junk bonds to finance it. They do manufacture tanks and guns and planes, but they sell them to other realms. Fascinatingly enough, much of the finances Kanoa Industries is using to purchase Japan is coming from the sale of weapons to core Earth to fight the other High Lords. It is literally the other nations of the Earth that are paying Kanoa Enterprises to purchase, very systematically, the entirety of Southeast Asia. So those are the 6 invading cosms: the caveman realm of the living lands, the high fantasy realm of Isle, the cyber-papal dystopia of Cyber France, the pulp power realm of the New Nile Empire, the Victorian horror realm of Aurorsh, and lastly, the technological corporate espionage realm of Nippon Tech/Pan Pacifica. 3 of these will make very nice tabletop armies. 2 of these are going to be a bit of a headache to stat, and the last one would not have an army because it wouldn't occur to them to make one. As I said in the first video, this system can very, very quickly and easily be accommodated to tabletop play. The story is there. The conflict is there. The genres are there. And in the next video, we will discuss the rules.